Hello and welcome to the Indy Author Podcast. Today, my guest is Clarissa Gosling. Hey, Clarissa, how are you doing?
Hi there, I'm doing very well, thank you.
To give our listeners and viewers a little bit of background on you, Clarissa's work explores purpose and belonging across worlds. Having never found an actual portal to fairyland, she creates her own fantastical worlds where dragons, fae, and other magical creatures rule. She's an admin for the 365 Writing Challenge, an international group that supports people to build the habit of writing. And she is one of the co-hosts of the Reading Queens podcast, where she discusses mainly young adult fantasy books and their major tropes. And she lives in the Netherlands. And so we're going to be talking today about the importance of good habits and how accountability groups can help. And I always like to start out this kind of conversation by asking, what did you see in your own creative life or the creative life of the people that you work with that led you to believe that this was a message that needed to be emphasized?
For a long time, I mean, many years, I talked about writing more. I used to keep a blog related to my previous profession. And every year I'd write a post for the new year, like, this is what I'm going to do this year. And almost every year it said, I want to write more. And I was never very specific about, do I want to write more blog posts and actually blog more regularly, or do I want to write anything else? But it was always there, that desire to write more. And it was, in fact, when I signed up for the 365 Writing Challenge that I actually started writing. I have got tons of ideas of where I've noted down, oh, you can write a book about this, or you can write a story about that. And they never actually went anywhere. Maybe I did a list of plot points of what could happen, or maybe I did a detail of a character, but I never got anywhere with it. But then I read about the 365 Writing Challenge and I joined them, and it was the idea of writing. You can set your own goal. And it was, right, I set mine to start with about as low as you could do, which was to write 100 words a day, which is not very much in one day. But then by the end of the year, you've got 36,000 words if you've written 100 words every day, or 36,500 words. And that's a good way towards getting a novel, just from 100 words.
We're recording this on December 12th. I anticipate that this episode is going to go out at the beginning of January 2023. And the most recent episode that's out as of the recording of this episode is Year End, The Writing Craft and the Publishing Voyage with Jennifer Hilt and Michael Ronn. That's episode 163. And it's interesting that these kinds of things do seem to come up at year end or year beginning. And it sounds like that was true for you. You would make the commitment at the beginning of the year and then had to kind of see it be chipped away as you went forward. Is that the case?
Oh, I'm not so sure as it got chipped away, as it never really materialized most of the time. And yeah, the end of the year, the beginning of a new year is often a time for reflection and setting goals and all that sort of thing, certainly. But there is a tendency for lots of things to tie like that together. The beginning of the year, they're talking about what are your goals for next year, looking ahead. And I guess any cutoff point is a good point to look back at what you've achieved and look forward for what you're going to achieve in the next period.
Yeah, I think it's a common theme of when I was talking with Jennifer and Michael about that year-end dilemma, is that there's this crush of work that you get to the end of the year and you're running out of runway for that year and you want to get to it. And then it's almost the follow-on to that is then you have a blank slate and you can do anything. And so maybe your vision gets set a little higher than it really needs to be in that scenario. What was the point at which you were getting stuck? Did it vary from work to work, or did you always find you were getting stuck in the same place?
Getting started, really. And, maybe I'd do one or two and then I wouldn't get any further. My most completed book was like maybe one chapter.
And
maybe not even that much.
what was derailing you? Was it family stuff? Was it other commitments? Was it a creative block?
I think it was a bit of everything. I mean, there's always other things you could be doing, and it's just sometimes it's the effort to actually sit down and open the computer and get started. And it's one reason that habits are so important, because they do make or break a lot of things. Why do we brush our teeth? We all know it's important because it's a habit. Every day you brush your teeth before you go to bed, and you brush your teeth after you've had breakfast. It's a good thing to do, but part of it is also the habit that you've ingrained into you since you were little, probably, that you brush your teeth, and that's what you do, and it's a good thing to do.
Yeah. Was there any guidance around the kinds of 100 words you were writing when you first started the 365 challenge? Did it have to be words in support of fictional work in progress, or could it be anything? What were you writing when you were starting out?
I think is a real benefit of the 365 writing challenge is there is no rules about what that is. You set your own goal. How many words do you want to write? We're now doing it on a weekly basis rather than on a daily basis, because obviously the idea of everybody has to write absolutely every day is somewhat detrimental to some people. Every day is maybe not realistic, but you can set how many days a week you want to write and how many words a week you want to write. So if that's 200 words a week and I want to write 2 days a week, or if that's 7,000 words a week and I want to write 7 days, there's everyone and everywhere in between. So within that, it's not structured. If you want to count journaling words, that's fine. If you want to count fiction, just fiction. If you want to count blog posts, the most important thing is that you're consistent. It's a personal challenge. So if you want to count emails, the difficult emails that you've written, then that's fine. Count difficult emails, but be consistent over the course of the year. It's not a contest between the different people. So it doesn't matter if I'm trying to write 1,000 words a day and you're trying to write 100 words a day. It's not looking to see who gets the most at the end of the week, month, year, or whatever. It's have you met your own goals? You said you were going to write 200 words a week. Have you done that in January? Yes. Great. Fantastic. Here's a badge. If you haven't, great. Now it's February. You can start again. So there isn't that judgment on types of writing. And unlike Nano, it doesn't have to just be one project. You can write a different thing every day if you want to.
Yeah, I've never tried to do Nano because I know it would be counter to just the way my mind works. The idea of sitting down and feeling like I have to write a certain number of words would be detrimental to me, not helpful to me. And there are other ways that I measure my productivity. But I think it's interesting when someone's just starting out. Let's say there's someone who feels like they have an important story they want to share with the world, and they show up in the 365 community or some other community. Then is there any guidance about what's realistic? Like, what if someone who's never written before shows up and they say that their goal is to write 10,000 words a month? Is the correct response for the people around them who are trying to be supportive to say, you go for it? Or is it best to say, just calm down for a minute and think about this?
Yeah. Within the 365, we don't try to judge what other people want to do, because obviously we don't know what their situation is. And maybe there are people who write 10,000 words a month, and there are people who write 10,000 words in the course of a whole year. And what we would suggest to people is that they work for a few weeks and things and see what actually they're achieving, and then look at that and go, okay, you set your goal at 10,000 words, but you're actually more frequently hitting 3,000 words. Wouldn't it be better to adjust your goal to the 3,000 words and then work from there?
There are lots of great tie-ins to other episodes that I'm going to point people to. So one is episode 146, which is Managing Writing with a Full-Time Career with J.W. Judge. And I imagine that the 10-Minute Author program is especially appealing to people who are juggling this with a full-time job or with a family, or with all the other commitments that we have in our lives. And the person who's needing support and accountability and building good habits to produce creative work in that environment is kind of different than the person who's doing this full-time. They have, in essence, they can pick from 24 hours a day that they could fill with writing. Do you, or does the group have any advice about different approaches people should take depending on what else they're juggling?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a question of being realistic. Don't attempt to overschedule yourself. You can't be productive 24 hours a day. You can't even be productive 18 hours a day. You've got to sleep and you've got to rest. You need time to rest. So don't try and assume that just because you spend an hour every evening watching telly, you can switch that to being an hour every evening writing, because actually you need some downtime and recuperation and refilling your creative well, as not just running straight from family to whatever other responsibilities to work and then trying to fit writing in as well. And then it all gets stressed and you lose the enjoyment of it.
Yeah, I'm going to pick out another episode here. Episode 158, What Writers Can Learn from Remote Workers, with Ryan Foy. And I think one of the things that's an interesting analogy is the idea that when we were all commuting to work, or when some of us were commuting to work, then that commute provided kind of that boundary between one part of your life and another part of your life. And those boundaries have really gotten hazy with so many people working from home. And similarly, I think that if you only have 10 minutes to write, I can't even imagine, because it probably takes me 10 minutes to get into the mindset of writing something. So if I set a stopwatch and started writing, 9 minutes of that I would have to throw away because it would just be me getting into the mindset. How do you handle that? Because you're in a situation where you're juggling many things at once. Like, how do you get yourself in the mental space to do what you want to do?
Personally, I'm not juggling so much at the moment. My children are both at school, so when they're at school, I'm at home and I have all that time to write or faff about on the computer or do the washing or whatever else that there is to do. At the very beginning, yes, I was trying to get 10 minutes in here and there, but now I have the luxury of having more time to devote to this. So I can sit down and read back what I did yesterday and spend some time getting back in the flow and looking at my outline and knowing where I'm going. And I'm not doing that with such a strict timer on myself anymore.
Yeah. I think another challenge for people when they're trying to decide how best to use the time that they want to apply to being creative is when you need to just sort of either sit and let the ideas percolate or get up and do something. I always think that there's a period of time when I'm writing a novel where my house is cleaner than at any other time because it's actually productive for me.
Yeah,
I don't want to just sit there and stare at a blank screen. I'll get up, do some laundry, and when I get back, I will have had the idea that I was waiting for. I'll write that down and then I'll go do something else. But sometimes it's hard to judge when getting up and doing something else for a little while is a good idea or when it's just an excuse to get up and not have to look at the screen. That an experience you have or have any tips for?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Becca Simon, her idea that not all writing is writing. Go out for a walk or do something. Yeah, do something else.
Yeah, I think every guest that I've ever spoken with on this general topic is a big proponent of the idea of not only getting up from your desk, but getting outside. And I do agree with that. There's just something about being out in the world that is helpful. How about people for whom word count is a problematic measure? Do you have advice for other habits people can build if they want to use some other measure of their productivity or creativity?
The obvious alternative is hours spent. There is no golden bullet. This is the best measure of what it is, because we all know that what we can produce a certain word count in a certain time, but that doesn't mean that we do every time. Again, it comes down to a question of knowing yourself and what works for you. Within the 365 writing challenge, we use word count as a measure of how people are doing. Obviously, that doesn't work so well when you're doing editing or when you're doing another part of the process. So the way we handle it is you can either not count anything for that time, only count words written rather than and ignore, for the purposes of this challenge, the time that you're spending on other tasks. Or you can pro rata. So if you spend an hour's editing, then you could give yourself what would be the equivalent words spent in however you deem to be useful. It's a personal challenge. Nobody is going to come and question you. Hey, you said you wrote 5,000 words last week and I know you're editing. But how does that work? It's what makes it helpful for you. If it makes it helpful for you to count that I spent an hour editing and I didn't really make very many words, but I want to count that time in the challenge, then yeah, by all means, give yourself an hour's worth of words and count that.
Talk a little bit about the accountability side of this. Does accountability always involve involving other people?
I don't think it does. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of things like Habitica is an app for doing habits, and you tick off and then you get your streak of days and your line. And there's a number of habit apps that are similar to that. Within the 365 group, we're split into smaller groups. I think there's about 20 or 25 people in each group. And that's the main group that you then talk in and you have chats, and every week there's a hey, how are you doing, what do you want to do this week, and how did you do on what you said you wanted to do last week, in a very low-key, friendly, we're all here to help each other sort of way.
Are those groups divided by genre or anything, or is it more
We
more
have done
arbitrary?
it a different way every year. We've done it by genre, we've done it by location in the world. For 2023, we're splitting it by annual word count goal. So within ranges, you would be in a group with other people who at the beginning of the year have said they want to write over the course of the year a similar number of words to you.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I think it would be hard if you had a group that had some like epic fantasy authors and some poets. It might be hard for them to come to a common understanding about, or I guess be able to share useful information that was going to apply to the other person's style. I think accountability groups can sometimes feel challenging to writers who are introverts. And I don't want to hit the writers are all introverts thing too hard, but certainly there are introverts among us. So what advice do you have for people who like the idea of reaching out to a group of people to get this kind of support, but are put off by the idea of doing that?
It's a question of finding what you're comfortable with. Do you want somebody that you can just app messages? Do you want something where you just tick boxes? It's what you're comfortable with.
Yeah, I think if it's a large group, like 20 or 25 people, that's a different beast. But if you're looking for a small accountability group or even an accountability partner, then there are the advantages of going to somebody you know because you know them and you know their style, and you've probably picked them because you know you're compatible and all those kinds of things. But then there's also the idea that if you go to someone that you don't know as well, maybe that's something that's arranged through a writers group or something like that, that they can bring a fresh perspective. You may have already been casually talking with other people about your work, and you're choosing your input by the people you're talking about it with, by the very nature of choosing those people, if that makes sense. Whereas if you go to somebody that you haven't had those conversations with, they might be able to bring a different perspective that you haven't heard before. You were recently on Kenny McKay's Author Your Dream podcast. And one of the things that came up very briefly, but I was just curious, maybe as a wrap up to ask you about this, is that you were talking about that you were handwriting your 100 words, I think, and then you made a transition to going on the computer. So I was just curious for you to talk a little bit about that. Like, what was driving your initial approach of doing it in handwriting? What was driving the decision that you had to move to a computer?
When I first started, my daughter was a baby and I didn't have all that much time, and I didn't have my computer on most of the time. So the idea of getting my computer out, turning it on, and then that would be over the time that I would have the baby that was allowing me not to do something else and not pay attention to them. So having a notebook and a pen was just so much quicker. And as an initial step to, I want to write, how can I make this as easy for me? Writing a page of my notebook was easier, at least in my head, than trying to do it on the computer. And so that was 100 words, 150 words was about a page of the notebook that I chose to use at the beginning of the thing. And that was going really well. I was writing it in the notebook and it was coming along well. And then at some point I worked out how many words go on a page, how many pages are there in a notebook, how many notebooks will I need to write a 50, 60, 70,000 word novel? And I'm like, that's quite a lot of typing up I'm going to have to do. And I think it was really my inherent laziness. By that point, I was writing like 2 or 3 pages most days, maybe a few more than that sometimes. So I was writing and I was enjoying it and I was finding the time to do it, which was another worry why I'd fit with just one day. And it was laziness of future me not wanting to then have to type up 10 notebooks or however many I would have to do. And so I switched it all onto the computer and I did it from that. I still journal by hand. So if I'm writing and just trying to brain dump and get rid of my thoughts, I still do that by hand because it's different than typing on the computer, and it feels more cathartic and freeing to get it all out. And I have no need to type it up.
Yeah, I'm saying this as someone who hasn't written anything maybe ever. Like, I always work on a computer, but I think that I can understand the attraction of writing is it's more like tangibly creative. It's different looking at a page that's filled with words than looking at a screen that's filled with words somehow. And just the physicality of writing it out, I can understand is appealing, although I just don't do it myself. Maybe I should do more.
Yeah, it's different. I think they've shown that you use your brain differently writing
Yeah.
by hand than writing on the computer.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It wasn't so much a creative choice as much as a practical choice for me.
Yeah. We're going to cut away from the conversation for just a bit because Clarissa's comments about habits made me curious about the writing related habits of other guests on the podcast. So I'm going to virtually bring some of those guests into the conversation. I sent this question out to past guests. What is a good habit that supports your creative work, and what is a bad habit that undermines your creative work? In past episodes, when I've solicited guest input, I've asked them to record the audio or video. But since I sent this query out right at the height of holiday craziness, I asked them to reply via email, and I'll read out the responses. So here's what they had to say. Doug Smith from episode 79, Making the Most of Your Short Fiction, says a good habit is to set a schedule, set an alarm, and set a goal for the day. And his bad habit is procrastination. Kelly Simmons, guest on episode 147, Writing for Audio, and way back on episode 28, Writing the Killer Query, says a good habit is keeping a tight calendar and preserving mornings to write or exercise. I'm available from 11 a.m. on is the phrase I've uttered more than any other in the universe. And a bad habit is I'm lazy about organizing files and links and keeping software and computer stuff up to date. So when something goes south, and it does, I get so angry. Lee Savino from episode 58, Author Newsletter, says a good habit is doing yoga or stretching and exercise to warm up my muscles. Years of sedentary work take their toll. Taking time to grow stronger leads to pain-free writing. And I love that piece of advice. I love all this advice, but that is certainly one I'm working on a lot myself. And a bad habit is checking Facebook or wanting to during writing sprints. And I think we're going to be hearing that from other guests as well. J.W. Judge, who was in episode 146, Managing Writing with a Full-Time Career, says, a good habit that I instilled years ago is having a dedicated time for doing my creative work and being intentional about maintaining it. For me, that time is getting up early and working on my books first thing in the morning. This habit has allowed me to write 4 nonfiction books and 4 novels over the last 5 years while having a busy litigation practice and raising a young family. I usually only get 30 to 60 minutes a day to do my creative work, but by doing it consistently over time, it leads to productivity and dependable results. And a bad habit is I tend to undermine my creative work by taking on too many projects. With only a limited amount of time to work on my creative projects, I would probably be best served to limit myself to writing rather than also podcasting and being engaged in a couple of online communities. I can sympathize with that, but those things are also fulfilling to me, so I accept that they undermine my ability to write more. Ronn Walker, who is a guest on episode 98, Redefining Indie Success Through Short Fiction, says a good habit that supports my creative work is consuming different types of art, whether it be painting, music, film, or even books that are outside my usual genre. And a bad habit that undermines my creative work is dealing with social media. I definitely see a trend here. And all that area entails. If you're not careful, you go down a rabbit hole and lose a lot of time on things that have little impact on your writing. Julie Duffy, who was guest way back on episode 17, Story a Day, says a good habit is reading. I know it sounds silly because we all got into this because we love to read, but when we think about writing, we tend to think about putting words on the page. It means we feel guilty if we're not at our desks, but really there's so much more to writing than words on the page, and reading is a huge part of that. If I'm reading more of the stuff I love that brings me joy, not the works I'm supposed to read, then I'm very likely to feel that itch to get to my desk. So yes, afternoons on the couch with a good book are part of my writing practice when I'm doing it right. I love hearing that advice. And habits that don't support my creativity, this is Julie Duffy, doom scrolling, aka looking for stimulation in the slot machine of social media and news sites. Yes, there's novelty and surprise there, but not the kind that makes me happy, energized, or ready to write. Michael Ronn, who has been on so many episodes, I just recommend you go to theindyauthor.com/podcast and search for his name, says a good habit that supports my creative work is staying consistent and writing every day. Also kind of a trend I'm hearing. By training myself to show up, I find that the words flow easier. A bad habit that undermines my creative work is starting projects before travel or other obligations. I find it hard to regain momentum once I lose it. Roland Denzel, who was in episode 155, The Benefits and Costs of Membership, says, a good habit is I like to set my desk and computer up so my next step is ready to go. And there's no question about where to start. I typically do this as the last step of my day the night before. Then I turn off my computer Wi-Fi as a reminder to write first, play later. Great piece of advice, Roland. And A bad habit, reacting immediately to things I see in a text, an email, or on a social media post. Most of these things don't need an immediate response or any response in the case of social media. Once you react to something like this, it can be hard to get back into a creative mindset. So you just keep scrolling and reacting, losing a lot of time over something that could have been done later. Bruce Robert Coffin, who is in episode 35, Mistakes Writers Make About Police Procedure and How to Avoid Them, says, a good habit, when I'm struggling to create, I drive to the local library to work. Free of distractions, I get a lot of writing done. And a bad habit is, not surprisingly, activating the social media notifications on my computer. When writing, it's best to just shut them off. Tiffany Yates Martin, another multi-episode guest, go to theindyauthor.com/podcast and search for Tiffany's name, says, good habits, regularity, and schedule. I block out mornings every weekday to work on my writing, course creation, or any other Fox print related business. Afternoons are for editing work. I've done this for decades very effectively. Prioritization and clarity. I've always re-examined my business and my goals regularly to make sure that I'm spending my time and effort where it matters to me. But recently, I made a concrete priority list of my goals in order that has been invaluable in keeping me from overscheduling or overcommitting and focusing on the things that are most important to me. It lets me know what to say no to and how best to use my time. Structure and deadlines. Tiffany says, luckily, my mind loves both of these, but holding myself to firm structure and deadlines and not being squishy about my work means I get everything done as promised and as planned. And her last good habit is rest. Allowing myself to regularly, completely, mentally detach from work, evenings, weekends, vacations, etc., has been a hard-learned skill and one of the most productive things I've done for my business. And Tiffany reports that a bad habit is email, busy work distractions, time frittering on minutiae, saying yes to too much, and being overly perfectionistic on tasks that don't require it. John Gaspard in episode 145, Speech to Text and Back Again, and also episode 128, Lessons from Filmmaking for the Indy Author. John says, for me, the best good habit I've developed is not to beat myself up when I'm writing. I've come to the place where I write when I write, and that's just fine. Of course, I have the advantage of not trying to earn a living from my writing, so that makes this habit easier. I spent many years in the real world writing to deadlines, and so I've banished deadlines insofar as I can from my writing life. And finally, Frank Zafiro, who is in episode 160, Mistakes Writers Make About Police Roles and How to Avoid Them, says, I know this might sound flippant, but I do mean it. Every time I finish a book or a story, I think it sucks. Later, when I go in and revise or proof listen to an audio version, I realize it is actually pretty good. Likewise, every time I look around at the marketplace, all I see are the people who are outperforming me in sales or prestige. I feel like I'm failing somehow, falling short, a fraud. But then I consider all the people who are still working to get as far in their journey as I am in mine, including those thousands upon thousands who say they want to write a book, but have yet to put even one word on the page. And I realize I'm actually doing pretty good. Believe in yourself. So thank you so much to my previous guests for sending those thoughts on good and bad habits. I hope the examples that my guests shared give you some idea for your own writing craft and publishing voyage. And Clarissa and I spoke a bit about the importance of finding approaches that you feel comfortable with in order to increase your creative output. And we'll wrap up the conversation with Clarissa with a discussion of the importance of also being willing to change up your approach. If you think that an accountability group might help you stick with the good habits and avoid the bad ones, let's get a little more information from Clarissa about the 365 Writing Challenge. Well, Clarissa, any other suggestions you'd like to make before we wrap up?
If people are interested in the 365 Writing Challenge, then they can look us up on the internet. We are now open for rolling enrollment, anytime enrollment. So do contact us. There is a mailing list that you can get without signing up. And then there are various levels of offer depending on what you feel you're more interested in.
Let the listeners and viewers know where they can go to find out more about you if they would like to do so.
Sure. My website is clarissagosling.com. My name, nice and easy. And I'm also Clarissa Gosling or something similar on most social media platforms. Apart from Instagram, where somebody else is Clarissa Gosling. So I have to put my middle initial in. So I'm Clarissa H. Gosling on Instagram.
Clarissa, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been great fun to talk to you.